My name is Tessa, and for the past year, I've been living in Europe, working in finance, and soaking in all the experiences that come with a fresh start in a new country. It's been a great opportunity for growth, both personally and professionally, but sometimes it feels like I left behind more than just my old job and hometown. Back home, my parents and younger sister Janet are still there, living their lives. Honestly, though, close-knit wouldn't be how I'd describe my family. Janet and I have always had one of those strange sibling relationships. She's 8 years younger than me, and we've spent most of our lives at opposite ends of the life spectrum. When I was stressing over high school exams, she was busy building pillow forts. By the time she hit her teenage years, I was already climbing the corporate ladder. We've never really had much in common, and our interactions have boiled down to the occasional happy birthday or Merry Christmas text. Before moving abroad, I had settled into a cozy apartment back home, an apartment that used to belong to my grandmother. After graduating from college and working a few years, I saved up enough money to stop renting and buy a place of my own. My parents offered to sell me Grandma's old apartment, and it seemed perfect. I'd grown up visiting her there, helping her water plants on the balcony, and savoring her famous chocolate chip cookies in the tiny sunlit kitchen. It wasn't just a property, it was a piece of my childhood. I paid my parents $120,000 for it, and made it my home for 3 wonderful years. Then, the job in Europe came along, and I couldn't say no. I decided to keep the apartment as an investment, renting it out while I explored this new chapter of my life. Things were going smoothly, until a few days ago, when my phone lit up with Janet's name. I stared at the screen, confused. We hadn't had a real conversation in years, so why was she calling now? My stomach tightened as I swiped to answer. "Tessa, hi?" she chirped, sounding far too cheerful. "How's Europe? How's work? Are you seeing anyone?" The rapid-fire questions caught me off guard. I managed a polite response, telling her about my job and how I wasn't dating anyone, but focusing on work. Then, out of nowhere, she dropped the bombshell. "Perfect. Mom and Dad said I can stay in your apartment while I'm in college. Isn't that great? It's just 2 blocks from campus." Her tone was casual, almost celebratory, like she was sharing fantastic news. But as her words sank in, a wave of frustration hit me. I gripped my phone tighter, my voice faltering as I interrupted her. "Wait, what? My apartment?" "Yeah," she said, like it was obvious. "Mom and Dad said it was fine, and it'll save me so much money since I won't have to pay rent." I sat there, stunned, as she continued rattling off her plans like she had already moved in. My thoughts spiraled. When had this been decided, and why had no one asked me? I tried to keep my voice steady. "Janet, you can't just move into my apartment without asking me. That's my place." She hesitated, clearly confused. "But Mom and Dad said—" "I don't care what they said," I cut in, my frustration bubbling over. "It's not their apartment to offer. It's mine. I bought it." The conversation ended with tension hanging in the air, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. In my family, nothing ever is. I spent the rest of the evening replaying the conversation in my head, trying to make sense of Janet's assumption. How could she, or worse, my parents, think it was okay to just hand over my apartment without consulting me? The audacity of it all made my blood boil. I didn't sleep well that night, tossing and turning with anger and confusion. The next morning, just as I sat down at my desk to sort through emails, my phone buzzed. It was Mom. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether to answer. Knowing my family, this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. I let it ring until the voicemail notification popped up, but she called again within minutes. With a sigh, I picked up. "Tessa, good morning," Mom said in her familiar, overly cheerful tone that meant trouble was brewing. "Morning, Mom," I replied cautiously. "We need to talk about Janet and the apartment." I leaned back in my chair, already bracing myself. "What about it?" Mom sighed, the kind of sigh she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. "Janet really needs a place to stay while she's in college, and your apartment is just sitting there empty. It's such a waste, don't you think? This is your sister, Tessa. Family helps family." I clenched my jaw, keeping my tone steady. "Mom, it's not sitting empty. I'm renting it out. And even if I weren't, that's still my decision to make, not yours." "Well," she said, her tone sharpening, "you're in Europe, and Janet is struggling. She needs your help, Tessa. You don't understand how hard it is for her right now." I fought the urge to shout. "I do understand, Mom, but this isn't about me not wanting to help. It's about boundaries. I bought that apartment with my own money. It's not up to you or Dad to offer it to Janet." Her voice hardened. "You're being selfish. Janet's just starting her life, and you've already got a good job and a nice place to live. Can't you sacrifice a little to help her out?" "Selfish?" The word stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Mom, I worked hard to afford that apartment. I didn't just inherit it. I paid you and Dad $120,000 for it, remember? And now you're saying I should just hand it over because Janet needs it? That's not fair. She didn't respond right away, but I could hear her frustration through the silence. You'll understand when you're older, she said finally, the condescension in her voice making my skin crawl. No, Mom. I understand now. And the answer is no, I said firmly, ending the call before she could guilt-trip me any further. I sat there for a moment, my hands shaking. The nerve of them. First Janet, and now Mom. I had a feeling this wasn't over, but I wasn't ready for what came next. That evening, I got a text from Dad. Family meeting. This Sunday. We need to resolve this Janet situation. I stared at the message, torn between anger and disbelief. They wanted to gang up on me now? Fine. If they wanted a fight, I'd come prepared. Sunday came faster than I expected. The moment I walked into my parents' house, I could feel the tension. Mom was sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, Janet beside her looking sheepish, and Dad stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed. Tessa, Dad began, we need to talk about what's best for the family. I crossed my arms, my voice calm but firm. Sure, let's talk about why you think it's okay to make decisions about my property without asking me first. Mom jumped in before Dad could respond. We're just trying to help Janet get a good start in life. Why can't you see that? Because helping Janet shouldn't mean taking advantage of me, I snapped. I've worked hard for everything I have, and I'm not going to apologize for setting boundaries. If Janet needs help, you can figure something else out, but the apartment isn't an option. Janet looked down, biting her lip, while Mom and Dad exchanged glances. I could feel their disapproval radiating off them, but I didn't care anymore. For the first time in a long time, I was standing my ground. As I left that day, I knew things between us wouldn't go back to normal, but for once I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't going to let their guilt and manipulation control me anymore. This was my life, and I was done letting them walk all over me. The breaking point came on an unassuming Friday evening. I was halfway through a late-night project when my phone buzzed incessantly. It was Janet, followed by a flurry of texts from Mom. At first I ignored them, my patience already thin from the week's events, but something in Janet's frantic tone made me pause. Tessa, call me now. It's urgent. With a sinking feeling, I swiped to open the message. The attached screenshot sent a wave of shock and fury through my veins. It was an email, a formal notice from my property management company. It read, "Your current tenants have been informed of the lease termination. We will assist the new resident with moving in as per instructions provided by your family." I sat frozen, rereading the email in disbelief. They had gone behind my back and terminated the lease. My hands trembled as I called Mom. She answered on the first ring, her tone infuriatingly calm. "Oh, Tessa, I was just about to call you." "Mom, what the hell is going on?" My voice cracked with barely restrained anger. "Why did I just get a notice saying the lease on my apartment is being terminated?" "Oh, honey, calm down," she said lightly. "We were just helping things along. Janet needed to move in quickly, and we thought this would save you the hassle." I gripped my phone so tightly, I thought it might shatter. "You what? Without asking me? Without even telling me?" "Well, it's not like you're using the place," she replied, her voice tinged with that condescending tone I'd come to hate. "Are you even listening to yourself? That apartment isn't yours. It's mine. I paid for it, and I'm renting it out. You had no right to do this." "Lower your voice, Tessa," she snapped. "We're family. Families help each other. Besides, it's better this way. Janet can focus on school without worrying about rent." Something inside me snapped. "Better for who, Mom? Janet? You? Certainly not me. You've crossed a line. Do you even realize what you've done? You've breached a legal agreement. Do you even know what kind of mess you've made for me?" "You're being dramatic," she said dismissively. "Dramatic?" I hissed. "You undermined me, manipulated the situation, and jeopardized my investment for Janet's convenience. And you call me dramatic?" At that moment, I made my decision. "You know what? I'm done. I've put up with your manipulations, your guilt trips, and your blatant favoritism for years. But this is too far. I'm cutting ties with all of you." There was stunned silence on the other end. Finally, Mom said, "You don't mean that." "Oh, I mean every word," I said coldly. "Consider this the last time you'll hear from me. And as for Janet, she's not moving into my apartment. I'll make sure of that." I hung up before she could respond, my heart pounding. My chest felt tight with a mixture of anger and heartbreak, but I knew I couldn't waver. The next morning, I called my lawyer and the property management company to reverse the lease termination and ensure no further interference from my family. I also had locks changed and formally instructed them to deal only with me moving forward. 2 days later, I sent an email to my parents and Janet. It was short and to the point. "Effective immediately, I am cutting contact. Any attempts to manipulate or sabotage my life will not be tolerated. I wish you the best, but I will no longer tolerate this toxicity. For the first time in years, I felt free. It wasn't just the act of standing up for myself. It was the realization that I no longer had to carry the weight of their expectations. This was my life, and I would live it on my terms no matter what they thought. The silence lasted 3 days. 3 blissful, tension-free days where I felt like I could finally breathe. No phone calls, no texts, no passive-aggressive emails. For the first time in years, my world felt peaceful, until my phone buzzed late one evening. This time, it wasn't Mom or Janet. It was Dad. I debated ignoring it, but something told me to pick up. Maybe a small part of me still hoped he would side with me, or at least try to understand. "Tessa," he began, his voice clipped and cold. "What's this nonsense about cutting ties? Do you have any idea how selfish you're being?" Selfish. There it was again. The word they all loved to throw at me whenever I dared to put myself first. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I made myself very clear. What you and Mom did, going behind my back, sabotaging my lease, it was the last straw. I'm not going to keep letting you walk all over me." His scoff was audible. "We're your family, Tessa. Family doesn't just abandon each other. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "No, Dad. You're the ones who pushed me to this point," I snapped, my composure slipping. "I've bent over backward for years, letting you dictate how I should live, letting Janet take priority in everything. But enough is enough. You don't get to guilt me into giving up what I've worked for just because it's convenient for you." "She's your sister," he said sharply. "We didn't think you'd be so cruel." "Cruel?" My voice cracked. "You sabotaged my rental income, disrespected my boundaries, and lied to Janet about that apartment being yours to give away. And I'm the cruel one?" There was a pause. Then his voice lowered. "You'll regret this, Tessa. One day when you need your family, you'll realize you've made a mistake." I let out a bitter laugh. "I needed you too, Dad. And you've made it clear that I was never the priority. Goodbye." I ended the call and immediately blocked his number. My hands were shaking, but not from anger this time. It was the finality of it all. The bridge between us was officially burned, and though part of me felt a pang of guilt, a stronger part felt relieved. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and called my best friend, Elise. She'd been my rock through everything, and as soon as she answered, I broke down. "They sabotaged my lease, Elise," I choked out. "They didn't even care how much it would cost me to fix it, and when I confronted them, they acted like I was the villain." "I'm not surprised," she said softly. "You've been putting up with their crap for years. But Tessa, I'm proud of you. Setting boundaries isn't easy, especially with family." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and for the first time in days, I let myself cry. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into work and started making plans to solidify my independence. I reached out to my property manager and lawyer to ensure my family couldn't pull another stunt. I also booked a solo trip to Italy, something I'd always dreamed of doing, but had put off for years. The nights were the hardest. The guilt would creep in, whispering that I was the problem, that I'd overreacted. But then I'd remind myself of the truth. I wasn't just standing up to them. I was standing up for myself. Janet texted me once, a single message that simply said, "I'm sorry." I didn't know they did that. I didn't reply. Maybe someday we'd rebuild something, but not now. Not while the wounds were still fresh. As the weeks turned into months, the weight on my chest slowly lifted. For the first time in my life, I was free of their expectations, their manipulation, their guilt trips. It wasn't the kind of freedom that came easily, but it was the kind I knew I'd never give up again. The weeks turned into months, and gradually, my life began to take on a new shape, one defined entirely by my choices. Without the constant tension and manipulation from my family, I finally had the space to breathe, to think, and to truly focus on myself. It was like stepping out of a suffocating fog and into the sunlight for the first time in years. The first big step was finalizing everything with the apartment. With my lawyer's help, I secured a new long-term tenant, someone who appreciated the space as much as I had. I also added a clause in my property management agreement to ensure no third party could interfere again. For the first time, the apartment felt like a source of pride rather than a battleground. Next, I booked that trip to Italy I'd always dreamed of. Standing on the cobblestone streets of Florence, gazing up at the Duomo, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had spent so much of my life tied to my family's expectations, sacrificing my own happiness to keep the peace. But here, far from their influence, I realized something important. I didn't need their approval to be happy. During one quiet evening on a Venetian balcony, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, it all led me to this moment of clarity. For years, I had let their opinions define my self-worth, but I now understood the value of self-respect. It wasn't selfish to protect what I had worked so hard for. It was necessary. Back in Europe, I threw myself into work with renewed energy, earning a promotion that opened doors I hadn't even considered before. I also made new friends, people who didn't carry the baggage of my past, and who celebrated my successes without jealousy or expectation. Slowly but surely, I was building a life that felt authentically mine. One evening, as I was unwinding with a cup of tea, I got an email from Janet. The subject line simply read, "I'm sorry." Against my better judgment, I opened it. The message was short and heartfelt. "Tessa, I didn't realize how much you had to fight for everything you've built. I never should have gone along with what Mom and Dad did. I'm sorry for putting you in that position. I hope one day we can talk again." I stared at the screen for a long moment, conflicted. The apology felt genuine, but the wounds were still raw. Instead of responding immediately, I decided to give myself time. Forgiveness, I realized, didn't have to be rushed. As for my parents, they remained silent, their pride likely keeping them from reaching out. Part of me wondered if they regretted their actions, but I knew better than to dwell on it. I couldn't control their behavior, only my reaction to it. The biggest change, though, was within myself. I no longer felt the need to explain or justify my decisions to anyone. The fear of being labeled selfish had lost its power over me. I had learned that standing firm didn't make me cruel. It made me strong. Months later, as I hosted a small dinner party in my Brussels apartment, I looked around at the laughter and warmth filling the room. For the first time, I wasn't weighed down by guilt or obligation. My life was mine, and it was beautiful. The past had taught me resilience, but the present was teaching me joy. And as for the future, it was wide open, filled with possibilities I was finally ready to embrace. Story 2. Sophia met Alex 12 years ago at a corporate networking event. Charming, knowledgeable, and confident, he was a logistics firm senior manager with kind eyes that put me at rest. His words on his 13-year-old daughter Mia caught my attention. His affection for her was obvious, and his warm voice showed that she was his universe. I had developed a profitable beauty salon network from scratch. My work was thriving, but I couldn't have a family. I had accepted years earlier that I couldn't have children, but it still hurt. The second chance I never thought I'd receive was meeting Alex and Mia. We married 6 months later and moved into my house. I made several times Alex's salary, but that didn't worry me. I married for love, family, and connection, not money. Once, I felt like I had found everything I needed. I gave Mia a secure, trustworthy automobile for her 16th birthday. She cried and squealed, "Thank you, Sophia. You're the finest." Her excitement made it worth it. 2 years later, when Mia received college acceptance letters, I offered to pay for her education. It wasn't an Ivy League institution, but she was excited, and I wanted to give her the finest options. I was happiest in my youth. I had my dream husband, a stepdaughter who loved me, and a happy, comfortable house. Mia chose to stay with us after graduation to save money while starting her profession. I enjoyed supporting her. She returned home sparkling one spring evening. After 2 years together, I knew Liam was kind, respectful, and loved her. Still, her left hand flashing a diamond ring as she came through the door astonished me. "Dad, Sophia," he proposed, she exclaimed, jumping. "We're marrying." Alex sprang up to hug her as I grinned like an idiot, happy for her. This was the moment I always wanted to be in. Later that night, Liam came over, and we opened a bottle of champagne I had saved for a special occasion. Mia reluctantly discussed wedding plans throughout the festivities. "I know this is a big ask," she said, anxiously twisting her engagement ring. "We've been looking at venues and it's expensive, about $150,000, including everything." I grinned and answered, "Done." I checked my accounts on my phone before she finished her thought. Her relief and excitement were worth every penny. "Really? Sophia, I'm very grateful." I gripped her hard, remembering the teenage girl who had welcomed me into her life. Wedding excitement followed for weeks. Mia first involved me in everything. We browsed bridal magazines and Pinterest boards at the kitchen table late at night. She sent me dress photos and asked about flowers, colors, and decorations. Her joy and excitement were a dream to watch. I didn't blink when she spotted her dream dress, a couture gown that cost more than my first automobile. It made her eyes light up when she tried it on, and that was enough for me. She chose a beautiful downtown historic hotel and a cuisine that would impress any culinary reviewer. I immediately deposited the funds to meet the expenses, excited to realize her fantasy wedding. Then, something changed. About 2 months into preparations, Mia retreated. Updates become hazy one-liners. Instead of protracted planning meetings, she rushed through dinner and went to her room or Liam's. "How's the planning?" To seem casual, I asked. She said, "Fine," scarcely looking up from her phone. If I asked for details, she was evasive. "Finalizing a couple things. No worries. Everything is under control." I initially urged myself not to take it personally. Wedding planning is stressful, so she was probably exhausted. Maybe she needed space to decide. I remembered being young and wanting to prove my independence. I shared my concerns one night while Alex and I were getting ready for bed. "Mia seems different lately," I said, more distant. "Is she okay?" Alex said, "She's just busy with the wedding," kissing my forehead. "You know, so many details to manage." "Do not worry." My gut niggle persisted as I nodded. Something was strange, and I felt like this was just the beginning. I chose to ignore my concerns and give Mia room. It was her wedding, not mine. Therefore, I didn't want to interfere. As weeks went, her distance became difficult to ignore. I gently mentioned a thought over coffee one morning. "Mia," I replied, seeing her phone scroll, "have you finalized the guest list? How many people are you inviting?" She looked up briefly. Yes. We limit it to 50 people. "That's nice." Nodding, I said intimate. I said casually, "I'd love to include my parents and my sister. They've always loved you and would want to rejoice with you." This change in her expression was sudden. Her face tightened as she slowly put her phone down. "Actually, we're only inviting close relatives and friends," she remarked sharply. "This celebration is supposed to be personal. I prefer to exclude non-family members. They hit me like a pail of frigid water. Really family. After 12 years of birthdays, holidays, and milestones, my family wasn't important." Breathing deeply, I tried to keep my voice steady. "I know you prefer to keep things private, but my parents and sister have known you since you were 13. They attended all your birthdays and graduations, supporting you. And," I paused, carefully, "I am paying for the entire wedding. Maybe we can make an exception for 3 people who care about you." I saw wrath in her eyes as she pouted. She pulled her chair back too hard when money was mentioned. She snapped, "Fine. Invitations will be sent. Happy now?" She grabbed her phone and rushed off from the kitchen before I could react. I heard the front door slam minutes later. In stunned stillness, my coffee grew cold as I attempted to grasp what had transpired. That night, Alex entered our bedroom with a familiar gaze that signaled I wouldn't like what he said. Sitting on the bed, he stroked his hair. He said, "We need to talk about what happened with Mia today." "Okay," I answered, putting my book down. "What about it?" "She called me earlier," he replied, ignoring me. "She cried. You were disrespectful about the guest list," she remarked. "Her unhappy state has her staying at Liam's tonight." Staring at him, I was amazed. "Rude?" "Alex, she told me my family isn't invited at her wedding, which I'm paying for, and I was calm when I told her." "I know," he answered cautiously. "Perhaps you could have been gentler with her. Her stress is high." I recounted the events word for word and watched him comprehend them. He stroked his hair again, a habit he had when upset. He said, "Okay, finally. Your point is understood. Talk to her tomorrow." 2 weeks of uneasy truce followed. Mia went home as if nothing happened. She texted me centerpiece photographs and asked my thoughts on flowers during breakfast, discussing wedding preparations. But something felt off, like we were treading on eggshells, pretending everything was normal. She dropped a bombshell one night. At supper, she casually said, "Mom found out about the wedding, back in town." Wine nearly choked me. Alex's fork hit his plate. Rachel, Mia's mother, was hardly mentioned in my 12 years with Alex. I knew the basics. She divorced due to drinking and moved out of state, abandoning Mia. No Christmas calls or birthday cards. "She really wants to be involved in the wedding planning," Mia exclaimed. "Actually, I invited her over for supper this weekend." My hand gripped my wine glass. This was my house, the one I bought with my own money and made our home. Mia should have asked permission before inviting someone over, especially someone with Rachel's past. I bit my tongue. Another fight was pointless. That weekend, I spent hours making herb-crusted rack of lamb, roasted veggies, and baked bread for dinner. I wanted everything perfect, but I didn't know why I wanted to please a woman who abandoned her daughter. Rachel arrived 30 minutes late. Her blonde hair and height made her stand out, yet she was harder than Mia. The artwork, furniture, and window view caught her attention as she entered my home. The look, a crude assessment, was familiar. She exclaimed, "What a large house," sounding insulting. Dinner started well, but ended poorly. Rachel chewed the meat and pursed her lips. "You know," she remarked, cutting another slice, "I always made this with rosemary and garlic. It enhances flavor." Mia loved it when I made it. While sipping wine, I said nothing. "And these vegetables," she said, pushing them around her plate. "Aren't they overdone? I always found that clean edges made things more appealing." I waited for Alex to say something, but he kept chopping his food into smaller pieces, I watched this woman insult my home cuisine as my husband stood mute, and Mia beaming like she'd hung the moon. My inner self changed, hardened. Rachel wiped her lips with her napkin and looked at Mia after dinner. Tell me about the venue, honey. Which hotel did you pick? The Grand Lorraine downtown, Mia said, beaming. It's lovely, Mom. They have gorgeous chandeliers. Rachel frowned. Oh, sweetheart, you can't marry there. That place is simple. Belmont Plaza is where you should have it. More esteemed. Tightened my fork grip. We spent nearly twice as much at Belmont Plaza, I said. The Grand Lorraine is a lovely venue, remaining calm. And the wedding we're planning isn't cheap. Rachel squinted. You can't skimp on your only daughter's wedding, the most significant day of her life. Something snapped inside me. A lady who hadn't sent her daughter a birthday card reduced 12 years of love, support, and financial hardship to cutting corners. I met her gaze and added, if you're so concerned about the venue, feel free to pay for the Belmont Plaza yourself. Since I'm paying $150,000 for this wedding, the Grand Lorraine should be fine. Deafening silence followed. Rachel got red-faced and stood up, her chair scraping the floor. I can see I'm not welcome here, she said, taking her purse. Honey, Mia, call me tomorrow. She bolted, slamming the door. Mia turned rage-faced toward me. How dare you? She yelled. How dare you insult Mom with money? You damaged everything with your cruelty and selfishness. She raced upstairs, slamming her bedroom door. I watched Alex discreetly pour himself another glass of wine. Startled, Alex entered our bedroom later that night, stern. He seemed to be stewing over what transpired. He murmured, You need to apologize to Mia, from the foot of the bed. I closed my book, losing patience. Apologize? For what? Telling truth? Your ex-wife came into my house, criticized everything I did, and said I was cheap about a wedding I paid for. Do you want my apology? You didn't have to embarrass her like that, he stated quietly, but insistently. Now Mia's upset, and it's making everything worse. I'm not apologizing, I clarified. Not now. Jaw constricted. Fine, he responded, taking a bed pillow. I'll sleep in the living room until you wake up. No argument. My rage and weird lucidity mixed as I watched him leave. Something had changed, and I couldn't ignore it. The next morning, my phone rang while I made coffee. My mother. Sophia, honey, she whispered, worried. What about Mia's wedding? When and where? No invitations have arrived for your dad, me, or Jenny. Maybe they got lost in the mail. Her comments hit me like a ton of bricks as I stared at the phone. Mom, I responded softly. They couldn't get lost. I'll figure it out. I sat at the kitchen counter for hours after the call, thoughts racing and coffee untouched. Keys were heard in the front door at 11 a.m. Mia entered, exhausted, and wearing yesterday's clothing. Mia, I called, staying calm despite my inner turmoil. We need to talk. She entered the kitchen tense. What is it? She questioned, avoiding eye contact. Just got off the phone with my mom. She said her parents haven't received wedding invites. Neither has Jenny. What's happening? She stiffened her posture, her expression hardening in defiance. They weren't invited. Excuse me? My voice was quiet but harsh. They're not coming to the wedding, she added plainly. I'm not inviting strangers. The term strangers sliced me. My parents, who had attended all her birthdays, graduations, and holidays for 12 years, were strangers? My sister, who helped her prepare for college interviews, was a stranger. Mia, that's wrong, I responded, trying to stay calm. It's ugly. These folks liked and supported you. My first time hearing her laugh was harsh and cruel. You want to discuss ugly? You did to my mom at supper last night? Sophia, you shamed her. Actually, you know, I don't want you at the wedding either. Time stopped. I stared at her, her words filling the room. Let me make sure I understand, I said softly. You don't want me, the one who paid for your wedding, to attend. That's right, she countered, elevating her chin. A strange serenity came over me. All the hurt, rage, and betrayal solidified. That's fine, I responded, sounding light and nice. I won't attend your wedding. I went upstairs to my home office, without waiting for her. My hands were steady when I revoked Mia's wedding account access in my banking app. Under a minute. Then I called the wedding coordinator. I introduced Sophia to Robert. Please cancel all wedding plans. He sounded shocked. Cancel everything? Is everything okay? No, it's not, I admitted. But it will. Please cancel everything and refund my account. Finally, I called the venue. The deposit was non-refundable, but my peace of mind was worth it. The house was quiet that night. Alex still slept on the couch. As I stared at the ceiling in bed, I realized I wasn't sad, felt free. Mia and Alex were at the kitchen table when I came downstairs the next morning. Mia leapt to her feet, furious when I entered. You canceled my wedding? She yelled. How dare you restrict my account? That was my wedding money. My motions were slow as I poured myself coffee. I'm not going to sponsor a wedding I'm not invited to, I said. You ruined everything. Her voice rose as she cried. The venue, flowers, and clothing are gone. I placed my coffee cup lightly. Actually, Mia, you ruined everything. Why not ask everybody you want at your wedding to pay? She gasped and rushed upstairs, slamming her door. Her face crumpled. Alex slowly rose, looking black. He yelled, "Fix this! Call everyone back, reopen the account, and reorganize, or I'll file for divorce." He paused, his voice dropping. Heavy and terrible threat hovered in the air. I stared at him and wondered how I had missed this aspect of him for years. "Okay," I answered calmly. "File divorce. Not against it." The color left his face. "You can't be serious, Sophia." "I am," I answered steady. "And since this is my house, please leave with Mia by tomorrow." Day continued with slammed doors and whispered arguments. Alex and Mia stood in the lobby with suitcases around 7 p.m. Mia had red, swollen eyes. "I never thought you could be so cruel," she spat. Honestly, I laughed in disbelief. "Cruel? I sponsored your clothing, car, education, and $150,000 wedding, Mia. You call me harsh because I won't let you treat me like dirt?" The door closed behind them. Standing in the calm of my home, it felt lighter. My serenity returned after years. In the weeks that followed, I reorganized my house, recovered my spaces, and focused on myself. To finalize the divorce, I blocked Mia and Alex on social media, changed my phone number, and called my lawyer. The prenup I demanded 12 years ago made it startling fast. I was occasionally questioned about the wedding. Did Mia wear her desired dress? Did Rachel arrive? Was Mia's wish fulfilled? Lacking knowledge, I didn't care. I knew you can't purchase love, respect, or gratitude. I spent 12 years trying to start a family with my checkbook and got heartbreak. Conclusions are also beginnings. I drink coffee in my yard every morning and watch the sunrise. My house is calm and my business is prospering. I'm not lonely, feeling liberated.